Hello everyone, good afternoon and welcome back for our second panel session for Smart Working Live Conference Day. For those of you who were just with us in our last panel, I'm still Don Brankin, Workplace Services Director at the Government Property Agency and host for this conversation. Over the next 30 minutes or so, I'm thrilled to be able to bring some real workplace experience experts together to discuss the small question of the future of work. Very similar to our last panel discussion, it's been built in an unconference format. So thank you to all of you who took part in voting for our theme and the conversation for this session. And that has led us to focusing on how we expect our workspaces to be used in the future. Just a reminder again that if you've got any comments, do keep those flowing in the comments section on your screen, and there's an opportunity to dig deeper into thoughts, ideas and questions at the 3 o'clock Q&A session with some of our GPA workplace experience experts. So let me introduce our excellent panel for this second session. So I'm joined by Stephen Boyd. Stephen is the Chief Executive at the Government Property Agency, by Peter Cheese, and Peter is the CEO at CIPD, and by Jazz Bilen, who is Director of People at Ofwat. And it's great to have you all with us. Thank you so much for taking time to be with us today. It is an absolutely fantastic panel, but it's worth noting we still need to work harder on our diversity. Particularly when it comes to gender diversity in our conversations. And that is something that we will continue to work on. Let's get cracking and open up the conversation. I hope it very much will develop as a conversation. I'd like to start with you, Stephen, if I can. And just picking up the theme of as an organisation that's responsible for delivering workspaces for civil servants around the country, how is GPA taking account of what the future might hold and how it can respond to changing requirements from our client organisations?
So anybody who tells you that they know what the future of work or the future of the office looks like is either kidding themselves or being not entirely honest with themselves. So I don't pretend to have all the answers for that. But GPA is one of the largest corporate occupiers in the UK, and we support a large number of clients, and we listen very carefully to what they say and what the people they employ say about what they need and what they want. And so for us, it's about keeping our ear very much to the ground on business need. Our workplaces are not an end in themselves. They're there to support the businesses that we support to be as productive and efficient as possible, and to support the people those businesses employ, who we call our customers. I really don't like the term end user, which is sometimes here. We support our customers to be effective, to have a great work-life balance, and support their well-being in those places. And so we do the things that are necessary to achieve that. And that does boil down, in the end of the day, to being in good locations with good quality and have spaces of the right size. You don't want big empty deserts with a couple of people rattling around in the corner, but you also need a good mixture of types of environment in those spaces so that people can do all the different types of work that they've come into the office to do. And one last thing I'd say in talking about the workplace is that we're in competition with home. And those of you who are looking at the screen can see I'm at home today, and I'm lucky enough to have a study. Yes, it's somewhat cluttered up by my bicycle, but it's a good place to work. Not everybody is in that circumstance, but home generally is comfortable. It's easy to get to. It's in most cases really good quality and it's got great connectivity. So we're competing with that, and so we've got to achieve all of those things in the workplace, and we've got to add into the mix community, social connection, and collaborating together for purpose. And if we can do those things for our clients and customers, then our workplaces will be popular. And to steal one of your phrases, Dom, we want our workplaces to be a magnet, not a mandate.
And that's a phrase that's come up several times throughout the day, interestingly, as well as data being a carrot, not a stick. We'll perhaps come back to that later. Peter, could I move on to you? And from your perspective, because you develop insight across sectors in the economy, it'd be really interesting to hear about how organisations are thinking about their future people strategies and what that means for their workplaces in the future, and whether there are any common or consistent themes that are emerging from your engagements.
Yeah, thanks, Dominic. It's great to be part of this event. Again, I know I've spoken about it in the past, and to reflect what Stephen said, anybody who says they can predict the future work is dreaming. But with that said, there's that great quote, isn't there, that the best way to predict the future is to help to shape it. And I think we have it within our gift right across all businesses and sectors to help to shape a better future of work. What is fascinating about what's going on is there are so many different elements at play. You'll all be familiar, I'm sure, with the basic pestle models of political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental, the so-called pestle model. And as I've observed, and many have observed, there is something significant going on in every single one of those dimensions. It's almost a sort of perfect storm, and it is creating a lot of challenge and a lot of uncertainty. And of course, on top of all of those things, some of the crises that we're working our way through at the moment. So it is, I think, in many ways, to think about this positively, this is a real inflection point, in my view, about how we think about work, how we think about workplaces, and of course, how we think about our workforces, and they're all being impacted. So if I start with the workforces, obviously, a lot of expectation has shifted in the workforce, and the underlying trends are already there. The younger generations in particular, the so-called millennials and now Gen Z, were talking much more before the pandemic even hit us about thinking of more of a life of jobs instead of a job for life, talking much more about flexibility and how they worked and work-life integration, all the debates about things like far more inclusive and safe places to work, and being motivated by purpose. What is this organization here to do, and what is my role in helping it accomplish that, and in terms of a wider purpose beyond just making money or whatever. So as I said, a lot of those underlying trends were there, but they've been definitely accelerated a lot through the pandemic. So expectations have shifted, and one very obvious one, which of course affects workplaces, is about flexible working and hybrid working and all those other things. The reality is there is not one size fits all. There's not even one size fits all in most organizations. Different teams need different things, and a lot of organizations I'm seeing, and indeed we did the same thing at the CIPD, is talking about team charters. So you have some overall principles in an organization. You then want to empower your team. So yeah, but different teams have slightly different needs and when they need to come together. But the third part of it is also respecting and understanding individual desires and needs and pulling all of that together. It then says, to touch on Stephen's point, that as we think about workplaces, how do we adapt them? How do we make them more flexible, more agile? It's remarkable to me how there is still resistance, of course. There's still a lot of change which we have to get used to, particularly from business leaders. and some people saying, well, what was wrong with what we did before? And yet the number of offices I've walked in over the years where everybody's just sat in front of computer screens, emailing colleagues 3 desks away, and then we talked about collaborative work environments. So this is a real time to think about, okay, I need to meet more of those different expectations because it's critical to attraction and retention. I need, therefore, to think about what is the office for? How do we create environments that are attractive to people? And I love that expression you just gave it. It's a magnet, not a mandate. And recognizing the different needs people have at different times when they come to work, and then blending that with other work environments, home work environments, and making sure also, of course, we have to understand our duty of care to employees when they're working remotely, that they have safe work environments there as well and can connect properly and so on. And then finally, the other part of the trilogy, so I've talked about workforce, workplace, is work itself and how that is changing. And obviously, in particular, over recent years, we've talked a lot about how technology is changing how we work and the nature of jobs and how we connect and how we learn. So there are a huge number of things going on that we still need to learn from in terms of the application of technology, in terms of working practices, but also the nature of jobs that we have. So in summary, I think we need to look at this time as a time where it's an exciting opportunity to change things for the good, to create workplaces that are really good for people, that are truly inclusive and all those other ideas. But it is therefore also a really important time for us to innovate and to try things. We don't have all the answers, as we've already said, but this is a real time for innovation and engaging our people in that innovation process to say, okay, so what works? And we won't always get it right. I mean, a good example, which many of you will be familiar with, are the trials on things like 4-day working weeks. Now, is 4-day working weeks going to be the answer? Will that become the norm? I don't know. But it's just really interesting to see it as an example of people really trying to push the boundaries in their thinking about what flexible work could look like, which is good for us in terms of our well-being, but also our productivity and output.
Thanks, Peter. Again, real consistency of some of the themes that we've seen being discussed and coming up in the comments as well, particularly about that importance of teams.
Yeah.
And teams as that sort of social unit within an organisation that need to operate effectively for them. And that was a great point at the end of it in terms of what works. So I was going to come to Jazz and ask, what works for Ofsted? My apologies, Ofwat. I'm sitting around the corner from Ofsted colleagues, so slightly distracted by their banner. What works for Ofwat?
Thanks, Don, and thank you everybody for giving me the opportunity for Ofwat to talk about some of these challenges that we're facing, like any organisation, as Peter's described and Stephen's described. I don't think anybody has all the answers, but this is evolution and not revolution. It's about learning, understanding what works, trial and error, and see to kind of get to that sweet point. Ofwat's been through a journey. It's been one of the government's rated as smart working, high smart working before the pandemic. So we were in quite a good position when the pandemic hit. And I think COVID has been a changing point within society for the world of work. And it's had a big shift in the way we view work, we see work, how we commute to work, and how we do work. And on a practical level, we're trying to see the approach looking at different lenses. So we look at the kind of corporate lens, what can Ofwat do? So we have created a framework which is quite loose in the sense of it has pillars. And in those pillars, we look at culture, people, leadership, technology. And we are very much looking through those lenses to say, how do we make the workplace, both at home and in an office location, because work happens at both places. How does that be? How can that be more meaningful? How can we make sure we look after people's well-being? There's a social connection, collaboration, all those things that colleagues have talked about. So from a corporate level here at Ofwat, what we've done is created a framework that enables us to give us some rail guards to work in. And we look at things like anchor days, so bringing people together for a purpose, because work has to be a great phrase. I love that. It has to be a magnet rather than a mandate, because I think people then just turn up to tick a box, and you won't get the creativity, you won't get the conversations, and they won't understand the point of doing what they've got to do, given the fact they're working very differently from the pandemic. So we have the framework, and within that framework, there are some corporate kind of rail guards. So we are very clear that things like probation meetings, they're the things that we need to do face to face. You need to sit down with people, talk to them, find out what's going on. It's an important part of their journey, when they join an organisation. We also, and Peter's picked up Ofwat, every team has a team charter, and in that team charter we clearly said, look, they're the railguards. We've got a great mantra here at Ofwat: nobody's 100% at home or 100% at the office. That's the kind of corporate picture, and within that, teams make that work. And some teams will come on a more regular basis because of the nature of their work. Other teams may be going off water company visits, going out to see other clients. There are all ways of connecting and very much coming together. So the team charter looks at various things about how they're going to work, how they want to be connected when they're working at home or in the office, cold calling, using Teams, the days they will be coming into the office, and that can vary because it all depends on the nature of the work and the purpose of coming to the office. And then obviously we try and look at, from an individual perspective, what can we do to bring people together to look at that social impact and the way people could be working. So we're very much looking at the lens of actually there's a need to come into the office, and spending time in person is really important. But also we have a conversation with an Ofwat. It's not just within what you need to do, but you have a knock-on effect to your team and teams outside of your team. So there might be a reason for why I need to work from home one particular day, but there might be a need for me to go into the office because there's a knock-on effect on the piece of work I'm doing. So it's not just looking through the lens of this suits me as an individual. You're actually looking from the lens of actually what's the impact on other colleagues and how we coming together in a physical sense, whatever that place and location may be. And the frequency of that has to have all those lenses. It feels it works to an extent at Ofwat. We, like any organisation, we're going through the transition and getting that sweet spot and working through. It's always difficult. But I think it's, as Peter described it, and I think Steve's got to be people-centric. There's got to be a reason, the purpose. If somebody coming in, they want to, and people do because they don't have the same space at home in terms of a private space to work. They might want to come in 5 days a week. There might be a business need for coming 5 days a week. But it's having that agility and that flexibility. But I think it's always good to have those corporate guidelines so you can get some kind of consistency within that. Have an inconsistent approach because it's reflective of the work, the nature of the teams, and what needs to happen. So they're the things we've very much done at Ofwat. We take our people with us, hopefully. That's what people say. And the approach is, it's got to be a magnet because we want to make sure when they come into the office or the office location, it's more than work itself. And one of the things we're going to be focusing on this year is that connectivity and that social interaction. That's really important. Having a break from the work, the home is important. Connecting with the colleagues. And especially when people are joining in a new organisation, we've all experienced a mass resignation and people moving around. I think it's even more important that teams take responsibility. If you've got a new starter, somebody we're picking up with our teams, that actually, as a team, you need to make sure you've got plans in place. We'll do the induction, but who's going to meet and greet them on the day, make them feel welcome, so they don't come to an empty office. Think about the day you want to induct them and take them out and connect with them, because that period of when somebody comes into an organisation is really important. So it's kind of different layers we're trying to link through and look through and make sure everybody has a responsibility to really embed kind of smart work and be agile in the way they work here at Ofwat.
Excellent, thank you. And I'm going to stick with you, if I may, Jazz, just because I wanted to pick up one of the comments, which I know a couple of people have reflected on as well, but it's Paul talking about a team charter including a motto that failure is an option. And I think that's fantastic, that commitment to experimentation and innovation. And I'd just be interested to know how you encourage and support that in Ofwat, and what you get from that kind of empowering people to make decisions, make choices, and occasionally make mistakes.
Absolutely, I think it's probably because that approach it needs to be in the DNA of any organisation, because we're all going to make mistakes. We all make good decisions, and sometimes we make great decisions. And I was really inspired. We've got our graduate programme live, a bit of plug for graduate programmes live at the moment with applications. And one of our current graduates has put on their LinkedIn posts and some of their materials they've been sharing that here at Ofwat, It's the trying, it's the having a go, and if we get it wrong, we get it wrong. And I don't think we've got that kind of culture where people recommend that experiment's important, but I think the important thing is to give it a go. And I think when we were looking at smart working and embedding it in hybrid working, the key thing is we'll experiment, and then we'll move into a phase of let's give it a go. Let's see how this team will work within the framework. And the team charters are designed to be re-looked at and reviewed. They're not set in stone, and keep on having a conversation, keep on checking in. Think about, we have huddles as well. We encourage our teams to have huddles. So if you're working from home, you are still being connected. Have a huddle. When you're on site, think about the meetings you're doing. And the idea is then to go back to the team charters and review them and say, that worked and that didn't work. And we don't think that's working for us. And we are also actively looking for that feedback from all our people from a corporate perspective and say, is our approach right? Do we need to dial things up and dial things down? And I think that continuous improvement and journey and conversation is really important. And it's okay to do it in, I will say, do it in chunks and phases, because we try and look to the future and think we're going to do this. Maybe look at 3 or 4, 6 months, next 6 months, try this. Let's see how this goes. And some things will work and some things won't. But what we will learn is we're learning to say, actually, some things we could have dialed up or done things differently. So we try to look at kind of phases, 3 to 6 months ahead, and say we're going to be doing this and keep reviewing again, going back to say, how does it feel for everybody? Is it meeting Ofwat's needs, and if we're meeting individual needs, how do we get that balance?
Great, thank you. Peter, what advice would you give to organisations in terms of creating a safe space for experimentation?
I think it's some of the things that Chaz has said. You open up the conversation to the organisation. I mean, we as leaders aren't going to decide all of these things. I think we want to set out some of the principles, as I've said, and try to understand our organisation and cultural context. But in the end, it's about, this is a real opportunity for empowerment, for people to have some say in how they shape the future of working practices. And as we've all said, explore through innovating and trialing, and it won't always work. And if it doesn't, then we learn and we move on. I think there are other elements of this there which are really important, which is there is some training that's got to happen in all of this as well, right? I mean, it's been a soapbox of mine for many years that we have not done enough historically to train line managers at every level to manage people effectively. We tend to promote because of their technical competence, or the best salesperson or best programmer or whatever. And now is the time we really need to think about this a lot harder, because we're trying to build more inclusive and safe workplaces and all that means. So we need people to understand better how to manage much more diverse teams. We need people to understand how do you manage teams who are working in diverse ways as well, because we also know that some of the barriers to this in the past have been a misunderstanding or misalignment of expectations. So we tend to judge people too much by how much we see that they are present. And that is a long-standing challenge where we have to shift the thinking and understanding of our line managers to judge people on what they produce. And even when I can't see them, I'm setting them clear objectives, and then I can judge them on, do they deliver the outputs and meet expectations in that regard. So there's a lot that we have to do to embed this, not only by empowering people and saying, okay, we can learn some stuff together, but then how do we take some of this forward and embed it in our cultures and train our managers to understand things like, as I said, output-driven performance and outcome-driven performance, to understand how to look after people when they're working in different and remote ways. Because we also know this is a well-being thing we're talking about here. Some of the big outcomes of these more flexible ways of working are more inclusion, so more opportunities for people to work when they've got caring responsibilities and other reasons as to why they need to mix their work and their home life. But we also know, and the evidence is growing strongly for this, that it is good for people's well-being. They can balance their lives better. They can go out for the run in the morning or whatever it is that helps to keep them well. But then we need managers to understand that as well, and also be able to understand if somebody is working very predominantly remotely, do they need some extra help? Are they themselves beginning to detach themselves too much from the organization? When we have these sorts of anchor days, are they actually coming in and participating in the anchor days, or are they becoming increasingly withdrawn? So there are lots of dynamics going on here. which haven't always been, they've always been dynamics in the workplace, but we haven't always seen them in quite the way that we are seeing them now when we have these different forms of working. And therefore, as I said, I think we've got to really help to train managers. And then finally, I would also say, in doing these trials, what is the outcome that we're seeking, right? So I go back to things like, okay, so we want people to feel that they're still safe and included, that they can be productive, that it is good for their well-being, that it is creating more inclusive workplaces. So, all right, so how are we measuring those things? And of course, as you know, Tom, one of the big debates in many workplaces at the moment where I see quite a lot of resistance is a belief that people who aren't visible are not being effective in their work. And it's an extraordinary sort of cultural dynamic when you think about it, isn't it? Because basically it's saying, I don't trust you. And yet we've gone through all of this time of the pandemic and all the lockdowns, and people have done remarkable things when they had to work remotely. But so we need to, so the point being that we still need to make sure that we are understanding the outcomes. We have appropriate measures of understanding whether people are productive and whether they're achieving their outputs and their outcomes, so that we learn forwards with all of that evidence as to, yeah, this really does work and this is why it's working and these are the outcomes that we're striving for, and I can demonstrate that that's what this is achieving.
Thanks, Peter. And it is really striking, isn't it, that the forced change in behaviour during lockdown does not mean a change in thinking or a change in belief.
Yeah,
and that's
right. That's right. There's still a lot that's very ingrained. I mean, after all, we've all grown up in a particular way of working. I mean, I do work much more hybrid now, but I've often said to my family, I could probably count on the fingers of one hand the number of days I'd worked from home in quite a long career prior to the pandemic. It's just not how most of us used to work. So, yes, we've got to overcome some of those quite natural resistances that we see, which are based around things which we haven't always well understood. And like, do I really trust people if I can't see them? And am I able to judge them on what they produce, not how many hours I think they're sat in front of a computer screen?
Yeah, absolutely. And Stephen, I think that leads into something about data and insight, and how we, I think, still need to do a lot of work to improve the data we have access to and the insight that we can develop from that. But I think there are some good signs that that's getting better.
Yeah, it's a bit of a leading question, isn't it, Dom? Because you know I'm super interested in data. So whilst we don't know everything about what the future of work is going to be like, we do know quite a lot about that. So we're heading in a clear direction, but we're making adjustments around the edges. So we do know that hybrid working is here to stay, and we do know that managed correctly, hybrid working can be good. There's a but in that, and it has to be managed correctly, so it can be good. And we do know that some activities are really well supported at home, and we do know some activities are much better supported in the office. And there's an obvious follow-on from that the office needs to be designed for the activities that are well supported in the office and not for the other ones, because they can be done at home. So we know quite a lot. So while we're saying we're unsure about exactly how the future will turn out, we do know direction of travel. It's also important, as Peter and Jazz have said, that we innovate. And one thing that's for sure is those people who say we've always done it this way probably ought to realize that always won't be a very long time, and that you need to try new things, providing that you fail small, fail quickly, and then share your experiences of failure with everybody you can find. And providing you can do those things, you can end up with a really good product. But I go back to what I said right at the outset about listening, gathering data on customer satisfaction, what they like, what they don't like, what works for them, what doesn't work for them, and then responding to that is a really, really useful thing. So we in the GPA, as you know, Dom, measure quite a lot of things, and yes, we do measure important things to property folk, like building condition and sustainability, energy usage, all of those things, which do in a roundabout way affect productivity and well-being. But the most important thing we do probably is to ask our customers, either directly through our own customer satisfaction surveys or through our partners' more detailed survey, our partners' leasemen's more detailed surveys, what works well and what doesn't work well. And the things that work well, we'll do more of those. And the things that don't work very well, stop doing them. Or do it in a different way. Try a different way in one place for 6 months, and if it doesn't work, stop it, do it somewhere else, try a different thing in another place. And gradually you bank things that have worked well. And so there's quite a lot banked already, but there's some parts that still need some exploration. And that exploration is partly by experimentation and partly by listening. And if that listening can be informed by hard data, hard evidence, then so much the better.
Thank you, Stephen. Look, sometimes at work, and it pains me to admit it, half an hour can really drag. This half an hour has just flown by at an amazing pace, but it does mean that we've come to the end of our time. But I think we could have spent the rest of the afternoon in these conversations. I do want to say a big thank you to our audience for joining us and for the comments that have been flashing back and forth as we've been holding our conversation. And a special thank you, of course, to Peter, Jazz and Stephen for being very generous with your experience, with your knowledge, with your expertise. And so again, to colleagues who've been watching this, I hope there's some inspiration in there. In that conversation and the discussion that we've had, made me think about connecting some of the themes throughout the whole of today's conference and some of those phrases that have kept cropping up and cropping up. I still go back to one of the very first ones we heard from Jez Edwards from Bytes at the beginning of the day. Who cares wins. I think there's something really quite powerful in that. Please remember that we do have a Q&A session in a few moments' time at 3 o'clock, where you can fire all those burning questions at our GPA Workplace Experience team. In the spirit of wanting to be a learning organisation and being committed to continuous improvement, we want your data as well. We want your feedback on what has worked well and what would be even better if. I'll be saying that at least once more in the closing session of the conference, but we'd be really grateful if you can take time and take a few minutes just to tell us your thoughts. Keep the networking going, keep the connections going, and I look forward to hopefully seeing many of you in our Q&A session later. Final thank you again to Peter, Jazz and Stephen. Really appreciate your time. Thank you very much, and we will see everybody later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.